Welcome back to News for the Week. Today we're going to talk about the handheld wars are heating up. I know a lot of you probably don't care, but people like Phil do. Phil loves handhelds. Protect Our Games Axe is gaining more momentum, specifically in California, and the 50 series Super GPU may not be dead after all. So we've got a lot to talk about this week, post-Computex. We're not going to talk about AI or any of that crap, but stick around, get yourself a cold one, or a warm one, if you're into that, and then we're going to talk about it. Let's go. So the handheld wars are officially heating up. No, not because of RTX Spark, which, to be honest, I know I said in my video, and I still believe it could be a great handheld architecture if it ever shrinks down far enough price-wise. I'm talking about specifically AMD's battle with Intel. Intel's Arc is actually starting to make its way. The Arc G series is now potentially making its way to handhelds. Intel, although it is sort of like said, we're not really that interested in doing Arc discrete GPUs anymore, but you know what looks like a whole lot of fun? An even more niche market of handheld gamers. So the Arc G3 handheld chips and the Arc G3 Extreme are basically intended to kind of give AMD a run for its money. Look, AMD has had a lot of success in the handheld industry. I mean, the RG Ally is obviously AMD based. My Legion Go Pro, whatever the hell it's called, is actually AMD based. Switch, that's a weird NVIDIA arrangement there. But Intel's basically looking at Arc as being potentially a great platform for next-gen handheld consoles. Now, handheld consoles that are currently really popular right now. I know my audience goes, look, laptops are dumb. Nobody wants to game on laptops. And the people that enjoy laptops go, handhelds are dumb. So it's kind of funny how it's like we're all pointing at each other saying what we really like is dumb. But handhelds that are really popular today, obviously the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally, which is extremely popular, the Legion Go, which I have, the MSI Claw, which Phil did a really good comparison between like the Legion Go and the Claw. But anyway, AMD has historically just kind of dominated the handheld market because as Ryzen matured, it's power efficient, it performs really well at low power and low frequency. And AMD has just done such amazing work over the years with their APUs. Now, Intel APU / internal graphics HD 610s or whatever the hell they were called were just never great. However, with Arc's architecture, the architecture getting so much better from Intel and things like XeSS3 and other feature sets that Intel's really worked very heavily on by investing into their GPU division has actually really started to close the gap. So Intel's really going to be banking on next-gen handhelds utilizing the architecture. Now, it's really interesting to see what's going to happen here in the next couple of years when RTX Spark potentially starts to enter the market. Now look, Jensen was asked specifically, hey, an RTX Spark handheld, maybe? NVIDIA Shield? Coming back, y'all remember the Shield? I remember the NVIDIA Shield. But at the time they were showing off the NVIDIA Shield and I just kept hearing Arnold.
So the Android games you can easily install out of the Google Play, or you can stream the games from your PC.
But that was using the Tegra chip and all that, and NVIDIA really kind of backed away from the Shield, and it wasn't a great success. But Jensen did say they would absolutely partner with any of these handheld manufacturers and or investors, if you will. Like MSI is obviously investing, Legion, right? Lenovo's obviously investing. You got ROG, Asus that's obviously invested in things like the Ally. It is a big division for these companies. So I could see NVIDIA wanting to get the Spark there where possible. But as we know, it is far too expensive. Now it's probably safe to say that although we all have our favorite fanboyisms, look, I don't care who you are. Even Steve is a fanboy of something, okay? Nobody's horse is that high. But whether you're Team AMD fanboy, Team Intel fanboy, or Team NVIDIA fanboy, I think consumers can agree on one thing. They want a device that performs well at a price that's affordable. The first one's not that hard to achieve these days. The second one, however, is where things really get completely depressing. The RTX Spark is not a handheld device, but anything can be if you scale it down enough. So I'm just definitely waiting to see what's going to happen there regarding the future. But wouldn't it be really interesting to see ROG Ally powered by NVIDIA? But anyway, the story here is not really about Intel or NVIDIA. It's just about how the handheld PC market is becoming important enough that everyone kind of wants a piece. So I don't know. I've never personally been that into handheld devices. Hell, I never even owned a Game Boy. But people like Phil absolutely love it. Like Phil will sit in his beanbag chair playing on his Ally while live streaming from his gaming desktop that's in the next room. Why do you do that?
I mean, laziness?
Okay, sure.
It's comfortable.
I would just drag the beanbag to the computer. All right, speaking of gamers, the California State Assembly passes the Protect Our Games Act. It's funny how, like, in UK, the movement of stop killing games started. Now in California, it's called Protect Our Games. Look, California, we know. All geopolitical discussion aside, California is extremely involved in lawmaking. And that is a very tiptoey way of saying there's a lot of reach that happens in the state of California. Ask me how I know. However, the California Assembly voted 43-16 to pass this bill called the Protect Our Games Act. And this is the first step into making it into law. So here's what it specifically intends to do. The bill would require game developers to communicate specified information to purchasers and prospective purchasers of a digital game 60 days before the operator ceases to provide services. Once that server closure day arrives, the studio would have to offer an alternative version of a patch or update to, or a refund for the game. I'm going to devil's advocate here a little bit, only because I have a developer background working in a development I don't want to call it a studio, but a development office where we wrote software specifically for the energy market, like, you know, power distribution companies like PG&E, Edison, ComEd, stuff like that. Not a consumer-facing product, but still a product that was licensed and purchased from business to business. Everyone clicks the EULA and never reads the damn thing. The EULA states specifically you do not own the game. You don't own the game. You may have given 50, 60, $100, but you don't own it. That only gave you a license to use said product in a non-commercial way, i.e. playing it on your computer at home. It also states in there that you don't own the IP and that IP can cease to exist at any time. So although I do agree with the sentiment here, especially with the Destiny 2 news and such, it's kind of funny how since that news broke, Destiny's last content piece dropped and it had over 800,000 concurrent players in an effort to save the title. I'm sorry, Sony has made up its mind. That is completely end of life, right? It is not coming back. No matter what change.org little petition you sign thinking you're making change, it's not going to change a damn thing. Sony has made up its mind. Its own IP is worth more than the IP it purchased. Anyway, I digress. Destiny 2 is a perfect example where they are ending the game. And with the game ending is going to be any future content and such, and eventually the servers are going to come down. So in a situation like this, the state of California's legislature is stating you are entitled to something, whether it be an offline version of the game that you can continue to play without DRM or pinging servers or whatever, or a refund for the title. Now, like I said, I'm going to devil's advocate here. I don't believe you're entitled to a refund. I really don't. Because however long you played that game still has value. A partial refund? Perhaps. But if you start to force game developers to have to think about eventually a title is going to end. Look, can you name a game that is still around today that you played as a kid, that's still downloadable, buyable, etc.? I guess it depends how old you are. World of Warcraft is the only one that I can truly think of. Maybe EverQuest, that's still around and has into the multiple decades of lifespan. That is because those games are also a monthly subscription where they continue to bring in money. But something like Destiny 2, that is a one-time purchase, maybe a season pass or something like that, will eventually stop bringing in revenue for the company. And for the company to either invest in changing source code or something in that game to make it now work in an offline mode, or to continue to pay to host servers where there's no money being brought in, I think a bill like this could stifle game companies from wanting to even potentially make games that are online services or having any sort of online feature sets to them, in fear that they're just going to have to give all the money back at the end of the game's lifespan. So although this is devil's advocating here, this is something that has to be thought of when you talk about a bill like this. For consumers to say, yes, I want to protect myself as a consumer so I can continue to have access to this game that I licensed. And I'm not going to say bought because you didn't buy the game, you licensed it. I think we might be potentially causing development studios in the future to play things way safer and way more cautiously, which could have a much longer term effect on how bad games can be, or maybe the way that they're designed in the future. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. If I did, I wouldn't be here doing this. I'd be doing other things just because I could. But I do think that this is a dangerous precedent being potentially set. So I'm not I'm speaking specifically to the refund part of it. Maybe potentially a partial refund. Right now, I think we need more than, say, 2 hours of refundability on something like Steam. Because on Steam, if you bought a title and you played it less than 2 hours, you can request a refund. And that's just to protect consumers from like, okay, this is a super terrible game, or the game maybe isn't even running properly on your system for whatever reason. You can get a refund. I think maybe that refund duration should extend longer, maybe 2 days instead of 2 hours played, 2 days played potentially. I don't know. Sometimes it takes more than 24 hours of playing a game before you even realize if you like it or not. So it's also important to note that this only affects California. Now, change can happen because of an individual market being affected by a new law, i.e. Europe. The reason why every smartphone today uses USB Type-C, and Apple being the last one to really hold out on getting off a proprietary connector into a more universal connector like USB-C, is specifically because of the, I forget what the specific laws are called, but in Europe it was required that USB-C and a unified plug be the norm out there. So when it comes down to serviceability, warranty issues and all of that, Europe has been very forward-facing and being much more consumer-friendly than the US is and many other markets when it comes to consumer protection law. This is the same sort of thing. Because it became cheaper for a company like Apple to say, fine, we will just make one model that is a world model rather than having a Euro model and every other market model, it becomes cheaper to just design for the lowest common denominator, which could be wherever those outliers are. California could potentially also make this a more realistic thing on a world level with unifying the movement of like Save Our Games Act in California with Stop Killing Games from the UK, becoming a more unified front on making the gaming industry more consumer friendly. So I think it's a good thing in that there needs to be discussion about what happens at the end of life on a game. But I think this is equal parts developers coming out with a game, it flops, and then they shut it down 6 months later, and here you are left with a $50 or $60 title in your library that you can't even play anymore, versus gamers maybe potentially being a little bit over-entitled, thinking that 10 years later, they're entitled to a refund. So it's got to land somewhere in the middle there. Now, some other potential alternatives that I know have been kicked around is like if a game is going to go offline and just they're going to sunset the title, development has no people dedicated to working on it anymore, no more bug testers, nothing. That is totally shut down. Why not open that code and make it open source for then individual projects to start to branch off from that for the enthusiasts that still love that title? But IP is a funny thing when it comes to brands. A lot of development studios absolutely positively protect the IP that they no longer even care about because of the fact that it's intellectual property. So what's happened is many titles in the past that have ended like that have had code kind of reverse engineered. Remember, we talked about that a few weeks ago too, with old like retro titles being not emulated, but completely decompiled and recompiled in current engine forms and working on modern platforms. Every single one of those projects have been both persecuted and shut down by the studios that have completely abandoned the title anyway. So although they do not want anything to do with it anymore, they also don't want you having anything to do with it anymore. And that's the precedent that's been set. So the idea of like a solution being have the developers release the code to the public is never going to happen. It's never going to happen. There's also might be some protected intellectual property within that code too that they want to protect. That's maybe not necessarily just that title, but there could be base code in there that's parts of other titles that they want to protect as well. So it's like to protect all of the portfolio, they have to kind of shut it down there. So again, I'm only speaking specifically from development experience. It wasn't a game studio, but I can see where that could potentially be a reason why they don't want to release source code. I also think this is something that can potentially be rectified if development studios start thinking about this at the time of development. Now, games can take 10 years to develop. Unless you're Star Citizen and you become completely just dependent on the early access model, and that's all you're ever going to be 15 years later. If they start planning for that day at the time of development, where they basically just have some sort of a big switch they can flip that then turns it into, I don't know, single player. Again, I'm ignorant when it comes to developing games. But if they start thinking about it now, 10 years from now, maybe we'll start seeing titles that have some sort of a reverse switch at the end of its life to then make it somehow continue to exist because of laws like this. My biggest fear is that You imagine now you go to download a game and you have to click, are you from California, yes or no? And then you click it, sorry, we cannot ship to your region, just like certain things on Amazon. Like in California, you can't buy a gas can on Amazon. I don't know if you know that. Even the spill-proof ones. Yeah, I know plenty of you right now are like, why the fuck?
It's okay, at least we can buy beer at our gas stations.
Yes, and we can also buy liquor at the gas stations all night long. It's not like other states like Carolina where we were like, what do you mean we can't buy whiskey at 9 p.m.? What the hell is this shit? Anyway, we are way off on a tangent here. So the next steps now, this is only past the first hurdle. There's a lot of hurdles here. So what's going to happen now is it's going to go to hearings where it's going to get testimony from both proponents and opponents of the bill. Opponents might bring up stuff like I just said. Supporters are going to bring up also stuff like I just said from the consumer aspect. And then from there, the bill can be amended. It can be pushed forward exactly as is, or it could be amended, and then the amended version will push forward. Then it will go to the Senate floor for a vote. The only thing the bill needs to pass the Senate floor is a simple majority. That means 21 votes. Now, what's going to happen here is from there, it goes to the governor's desk where the governor can either automatically sign it into a law, let it kind of force its way into law naturally through the Senate and the House, or he can veto it. Now, vetoing it wouldn't be the death of the bill right there. The legislature can override his veto, but then that requires an overwhelming majority, specifically through needing to get a 2/3 vote. That is extremely uncommon, specifically because of party lines. But with that said, it's getting interesting. So here's a quote from earlier in May from one of the organizations that's lobbying in the ESA, or the Entertainment Software Association. It says, many games depend on evolving technology. Now, this is someone against the bill, by the way. It says, many games depend on evolving technology, licensed content, and online systems that change over time. Assembly Bill 1921 could force developers to spend limited time and resources keeping old systems running instead of creating new games, features, and technology. In the end, this policy doesn't reflect how games actually work today. This bill sets strict rules that could ultimately mean fewer new and innovative experiences for players. Like I just said earlier today, I think it might stifle potential technology and gaming moving forward. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see where this one lands. Anyway, games that are currently kind of affected right now by you licensed it, you loved it, and it disappeared. The Crew. Ubisoft pumped The Crew as being like the next racing game, the last racing game you would ever need. And The Crew didn't last very long. Obviously, Destiny 2. Is an example. Kingdom Hearts 1, 2, and 3 on Switch are being delisted on June 6, 2027. So those already have an end of life, right? So it means no one can play them via streaming on Switch 1 or 2 anymore. And they're only offering a 50% discount to those who paid for the cloud versions to switch over to the digital version. So what they're doing is they're switching from cloud-based gaming version of Kingdom Hearts 1, 2, and 3 to a digital version. Now those are different versions of the game. Entirely. So they're only offering a 50% discount to those that need to switch from cloud over to digital. So it's almost like they're making more money by taking a service offline, which is kind of crazy. So it's definitely going to be an interesting battle to see where this one turns out. It's almost like as fierce as the right to repair movement. Now it's just the save our games versus our, stop killing games, kind of the same thing, but different. Where do you guys land on this? I'm curious. This has got to be a divided topic. Do you guys think that this is something that could hurt gaming in the future? Or do you think this is something that is designed to protect consumers? I don't think it's black and white. I think it's very gray. Again, Destiny 2 is an example. It's been around for years and years and years. I know people that have thousands of hours played in that game with jobs. I don't know how they do it, but they've done it. They've got their money's worth, as far as I'm concerned. But there was a lot of DLC. There was a lot of things that people paid additional money for that's just going to poof, be gone. No access whatsoever. Just completely, you won't even be able to launch the title anymore. But I also think it's on you. If you don't read the EULA and you click accept, there's no legal recourse there. You accepted it. So it's time for the rumor mill. We're going to talk about Intel's upcoming Z970 and Z990 flagship chipsets, which will reportedly consume up to 14 watts peak load if all PCIe 5 devices are occupied. This is kind of keeping trend with the latest rumors we've seen about Intel's next-gen Core Ultras just going severely, like cranking the knob on power delivery. So we've already seen rumors that the new Intel, socket 1952 or whatever it is, the next core Intel CPUs are going to reportedly pull up to 400 watts. Man, I can't wait to test it. I'm just curious, given what's happened with 13th and 14th gen degradation due to high power consumption. What have they changed in the silicon that's going to make this any different? How are people going to respond to that? Even if it matches AMD on the gaming side, are you going to want to have a 400 watt CPU that an 180 watt CPU is capable of doing? It's going to be a fierce battle to see, but I've had plenty of people at Computex pull me aside and say, hey, here's what we're being prepped for by Intel. And I think it's pretty obvious if you look at the new AIO designs that have been popping up around Computex that these manufacturers have been tipped off as to what the latest needs are going to be on coolers. And there's a reason why they're all exceeding 350 watts and approaching 400 watts to cool. It's kind of crazy. But now we're talking about the chipset pulling more power. So to put it in perspective, the Z890 only draws about 6 watts at idle state. And if you occupy all PCIe 5 slots on Z970 and 990, it's going to pull up to 14 watts peak load. Now that's only if all Gen 5 devices are occupied at like M.2 slots and such. Not talking about graphics cards or any of that. We're talking about specifically the PCH power draw. And like I said, 6 watts base draw for the Z890, now going up to 7.9 watts. So it's already 1.9 watts higher. It's just so fun, such a funny discussion, right? Because no one's going to notice this much wattage. Just about the trends, right? Where are the trends going? And now to see it go up to 14 watts, which is more than double the power draw potentially of Z890, it's going to be interesting. But again, you're adding more devices, more native PCIe 5. Apparently there's supposed to be, I think, 3 or 4 native PCIe 5 slots on the chipset for Z970 and Z990. So that's going to be great for those that want to run multiple Gen 5 drives, because they need the speed on multiple drives for whichever reason, raids, stuff like that. It's gonna be nice to see more native Gen 5 slots. But anyway, the crazy part too though is that it's 22% smaller versus a Z890 in terms of just the PCH architecture and size. So more power and smaller, which kind of is the trend. It seems like the smaller you shrink a process, the more power hungry it kind of becomes. But anyway, that comes to us via WCCF Tech. RTX 50 Super Series might not be canceled after all. So tips have started rolling in again, and now I'm hearing 2 different things, by the way. I'm hearing end of 2026, because theoretically, we were supposed to have had the Super Series already, but obviously the GPU pricing, the GPU demand for the AI build-outs, as well as VRAM, is literally caused that whole launch to kind of get canceled. People just assumed they were going to cancel it altogether, which would have been the first time since the 16 series, right? 1650, 1660 Super and all that we will not have had a Super card. We had TI, obviously, with 10 series. We had Supers with 20 series and forward and newer. But this would be the first time the Super cards were entirely canceled. And I would have been okay with that. If you want to know the truth, rather than giving us different variants with potentially even more VRAM, how are you going to do that today? I don't know. Just reduce the price of the current cards and call it a day. You already have 90% market share, NVIDIA. Why do you have to launch 3 or 4 more cards, right? Why? It's dumb. Don't even bother. Just make current silicon cheaper. But now we're seeing multiple rumors that it was potentially scheduled for a 2027 CES launch, which is in January, or potentially a fall or Christmas season 2026. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this lands, because the other rumors are that all of the Super models are getting a bump in VRAM. So how on earth could you have a Super model, which is intended to slate between the main SKUs, have more VRAM, but not be more expensive than the SKU above it that has less VRAM? I don't know, but apparently we're hearing rumors of as high as 24 gigabytes for things like 5070 Ti, 5080 and whatnot, which are currently 16 gigabyte cards. So I don't know. We're going to see how that ends up really playing out. But I don't think they need to exist, personally. And I did mention that NVIDIA currently has 90% market share on discrete GPUs, specifically in the gaming segment. So why do you need to put out more GPUs? It just doesn't make any sense. AMD Zen6 Ryzen, 100% run at above 6.5 gigahertz. Leaker claims via Overclock 3D. Huge boost as Ryzen 9000 can't reach 6 gigahertz. Like, it can get close. It can get like 5.7, 5.8 if you have a really good chip. But AMD reportedly plans to release Ryzen desktop CPUs with up to 24 Zen 6 CPU cores. These CPUs will use CCDs or core complex dies with up to 12 cores each. Finally! How long was I saying? Are we able to scale those beyond 8? Is there a reason why we're stuck at 8 cores on per CCD, but now we're looking at up to 12 cores each. And these CCDs have 48 megabytes of L3 cache and can have an extra 96 megabytes of L3 V cache added for a total of 144 megabytes of L3 cache. AMD will also reportedly use bridge dies to connect their CPU CCDs to a higher speed I/O die, reducing memory latencies. That's been the only thing that really makes AMD's CCD architecture lackluster in certain types of tests and workloads, is because of the interconnect latency between the Infinity Fabric. So having a faster connect between those CCDs reduces the latency, which would only make things better, which is why I say Intel has their work really cut out for them to really catch up to what AMD's been doing. So up to 6.5 gigahertz though, it's crazy. You know what? I'm taking that with a grain of salt, and let me tell you why. AMD is notorious for getting in their labs saying, how far can we push this thing? The first Threadripper, I remember this, it was Capsation in Los Angeles in 2017. And they literally were like, we were able to reach 5 gigahertz and over 5 gigahertz, but they did on LN2 and they used XOC overclockers to do it. And then they marketed that all over the place, that it was capable of 5 gigahertz. Yeah, if you, in those circumstances, it's a total misleading type of promotion. And I have a feeling this is going to be the same sort of thing. Now, I personally, having it reach 6 gigahertz would be great, but having AMD actually give you advertised numbers on a consistent basis would be the true story here. Because every single AMD CPU always says up to 5.4, up to 5.3. But then you get into a real use case scenario and you're watching the clocks and it bounces all over the place. It hits 5.3 for a second, drops down to 5.0, 5.1, 5.0, 5.1, and then 5.3, 5.0, 5.1. I'd love to have them literally just be able to hit the clock. That's one thing that although Intel has really fallen behind, it still gives you the advertised clocks, and you get them almost all the time, depending on what the use case is. Obviously, AVX instruction sets, that changes things. Usually there's offsets that will reduce the memory, or the frequency just for temperature reasons, but I don't know. It sounds like they're really heavily relying on faster interconnect between CCDs, probably faster memory support, more cache. Now regarding AMD at Computex, actually just before Computex, they announced that they were bringing back the 5800X3D. It's kind of like it's like that ex-girlfriend that just won't stop calling. The 58X3D just keeps coming back. Now, admittedly, it was an important SKU for them. It changed gaming CPUs, specifically what a gaming CPU meant moving forward. But the reason why they're doing it is because they know that given the DDR5, although AMD is a part of the problem as to why DDR5 is so hard to source, they also are now trying to help you guys by relaunching the 5800X3D because they know more people are potentially trying to source used or secondhand DDR4. Motherboard manufacturers have started noticing an uptick in people requesting or looking for DDR4 variants of motherboards. Intel's the only one through 13th and 14th gen, I think 12th gen as well, maybe, it could be wrong, that actually had D4 and D5, DDR4 and DDR5 versions of their boards because the CPU memory controller could work with both. But you had to choose, at the motherboard level, whether or not you were going to run DDR4 or DDR5. AMD didn't. Once AM5 launched, it was DDR5 only, and that was it. So the only way for them to really kind of capture any of the potential DDR4 sales is for them to continue offering AM4 SKUs. And specifically, the one that they continue to manufacture and pop back up every now and then is a 5800X3D. The problem is it's still $350. To put that into perspective, right now on Amazon, the 7800X3D is $379. And I would take a 7800X3D over a 5800X3D any day, and then I would just hold out or just do my best to try and find some DDR5 that I can afford. I would rather go that route personally than put myself locked into a dead-end platform, especially since we know AM5 has support through 2030. They've announced that at Computex. So knowing getting a 5800X3D, that's it, that's the end of the road, versus, okay, I'll have to save for a little longer. It's going to be painful, but I'll find myself some DDR5, get a better CPU for $30 more, and have, another 4 years of support for that platform seems like the better route to go for me. The CPU would have to be significantly cheaper as far as I'm concerned for it to matter, given the fact that it's already 3 to 4 years old. So it's a hard sell as far as I'm concerned. But that loops us back into the discussion here that production for DDR4 memory and motherboards is apparently restarting amid unprecedented memory shortages? Now, this comes to us via Tom's Hardware. It says, we've confirmed with over a half a dozen sources, motherboard manufacturers and module houses are seeing an increase in demand for DDR4 platforms and shifting production accordingly. This could create challenges, however, as high-performance DDR4 dies, such as the famous Samsung B die, is no longer in production, as most of the revamped DDR4 kits will top out at a rather pedestrian DDR4 3600. Nobody needed more than DDR4 3600, by the way. Every super fast 4,000 plus DIMM sets that we had of DDR4, including I had some Crucial Ballistics of 5,000, just didn't make a difference in overall performance, but it certainly affected stability. I don't know how I feel about this, and let me explain why. The same manufacturers that are at full capacity right now with DDR5 are the same manufacturers that would be responsible for producing DDR4. Why the fuck would they want to turn off any machinery making DDR5 at a 1,000% profit versus last year to produce a less profitable product? Why would they do that? If they were going to throw you a bone, they would have done it by now. But no. All the module houses are going all in on DDR5 and HBM. They all come out of the same place. So I do not see that being a valid, realistic story. I believe Tom's Hardware got people saying they're seeing demand, but I don't think that demand is going to turn into any sort of production change whatsoever regarding DDR4. I just don't see it happening. It's like the silicon is so much more valuable in DDR5 right now and HBM that you are never going to get any of these manufacturers making it to commit the wafer to an older, less profitable tech for gamers. Okay, it's just not going to happen. So I don't know. There was an illness going around Computex, and I think it kind of hit that story a little bit, and the people involved, they definitely had some fever going on or something there. I just don't see it. I don't see it at all. That's like convincing Honda to, you know what, we should make the 2018 Civic again. Yeah, we should do that. That'd be like during the human malware when cars were scarce and couldn't keep anything in stock. They're like, you know what we should do? We should bring back the 1999 Kia Elantra. That would make people happy. No, that's not how that works. These people are making record profits like they've never seen before. And you think that capitalism in that aspect is going to allow them to let go of that profit? No. I'm sorry. Please take your head out of your ass. All right, that's it for today's news. I'm curious as to how you guys feel about some of these topics here. I mean, the handheld gaming side, pretty interesting. RTX Spark, definitely a wait and see where that lands. Intel's 400 watt CPUs with now 14 watt PCHs on top of that. Anyway, at least there was more hardware in this one. All right, guys, sound off how you guys felt about today's topics. What kind of resonated with you, and what do you think this is just complete bullshit? All right, guys, thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in next week's news video. The first thread, remember, you know, when you take a dump that's poking out of the water, you know you ate good the night before.
Should we shout out to the 5 people that are watching this on the toilet?
I know. And give this video a like if you're watching it on the toilet.